Okay, so let's do this as a take two. I tried something different with the power rankings tonight. I thought it would be fun. I thought it would be something different for one time, and it's not worth it. It's not worth it. So it won't happen again. Um, I had a very long day, and I thought this would be kind of a fun thing to do, and uh, so yeah, here we are. Power rankings again. I'm gonna just do this because there's a lot of people who won't have seen the other power rankings, so I'm just gonna go through this as if we're all going through this for the first time, and I might as well look at where I had all the rankings for last week and go through this again. And it is tough at this time of year because a lot of teams are close together, and I just make adjustments to the power rankings based on each individual game. So when I see people saying, "Oh, this team's got this record and that record," yeah, each individual day I look at the game, I look at how they won, who else won, and then I make the changes from there. So I do the best I can. That being said, moving along at number 31, dropping 5 spots from where they were last week, is LA. This is the first week they've been at the bottom. This is the lowest they've been. The highest they've been on this is 26. So 31, that's bottom. There's not really any further down to go, although there were points last year where I had Seattle written on the board and I had teams below that, usually Ottawa, I believe. This year I don't have room to do that, so can't be doing that either. Yeah, so LA's at the bottom, number 30. At the same spot they were, moving up 1 spot from where they were last week is Detroit. So the Red Wings had that victory over the Boston Bruins, and it was impressive enough that for me, I'm like, you know what, they're not playing the worst out of everybody, and an impressive victory is an impressive victory. We'll see if they can keep that up tomorrow. Number 29, same spot they were last week. And for Detroit, the highest they've been all year is 20. For these guys, the same spot they were last week. Minnesota hasn't been any higher than 26. They haven't been any lower than 31 because you can't be lower than 31. That being said, there are some reasons to think that Minnesota might be on the verge of getting better. The comeback against San Jose, and now tonight the comeback against Arizona as well. These are impressive turn of events, and we'll see how things go for them from here. If you have your fingers crossed as a Minnesota fan, understandable. Number 28, dropping from 25 where they were last week, and that is the New Jersey Devils. The Devils coming into a game tomorrow in Vancouver against a team that's also been struggling for the Devils. Their goaltending is getting somewhat better with Blackwood, and yet the results still not there. So Blackwood's numbers get better. Schneider got bombed in the last game. It wasn't his fault. I know his numbers aren't great coming out of that last game either, but that game was not on him. That was just a team thing in front of him. I felt bad for Schneider in that one because his save percentage didn't really get helped, and I don't think it had to do with him. Number 27, moving up 3 spots from last week, Ottawa, and this is the highest they've been on the countdown so far this year. The previous high was 29th. So for Ottawa, the hard work really makes a big difference. They are working very hard. There's a lot of credit being given to Jean-Gabriel Pageau, and I get it. I would give credit to Nilsson and net. He's given them stable goaltending thus far this season they didn't really have last year. And I would also give credit to the coach behind the bench, who is getting more out of this team than he probably should be. When you look at that roster, it's not a good roster, and yet somehow they're getting some results, and they're beating some teams they're not supposed to. Number 26, dropping 3 spots from where they were last week, is Columbus. And Columbus, they're kind of falling off the pace, out of the playoffs and whatnot, and they had a half decent start, and that's kind of faded for them. So, and I know there were Columbus fans before the season that were really hoping that things would be better, but Nyquist is not Panarin. He's not as far away from Panarin as the salaries would necessarily suggest between the two of them, but there's enough of a difference with Columbus this year overall that the odds of them making the playoffs are slim. Number 25, moving up 3 spots from last week, is San Jose. Now, San Jose has not a great chance of making the playoffs either right now, but 3 wins in a row helps. The shootout victory over Nashville tonight, that was kind of nice, and we'll see how things go for them from here. But yeah, for San Jose, this was a nice jump for them this week. We'll see if they can make another jump next week. Yeah. And again, 3 wins in a week, you'd think they should move up higher. But again, we have so many teams that are kind of all cluttered together. Number 24, and dropping 3 spots from last week. And I know Ranger fans aren't happy about it, but they dropped. And, the results for me, it's just, I need a moment. All right. Going to get through this. But yeah, for the Rangers, they drop back a few spots. There's inconsistent play that goes on here. I talked about it in the preview for tomorrow's game. And the overall record is still middle of the road. So for the Rangers, we'll see where things end up with them. But for now, it's kind of middle of the road for me. And yeah, so they dropped to 24. Part of the reason is because moving up to 23 from 27 last week is Chicago. Chicago's showing some signs that they're getting out of their doldrums that they've been in early in the season. So for Chicago, I'm mildly optimistic that they're going to take a run at it. Remember, the Central is really wide open right now. And with the Central being as wide open as it is, they have a chance. As long as Crawford and Leonard are playing the way they have been over the last couple of weeks, they have a very good chance. Leonard's been fantastic. Really, in all honesty, fantastic. And then Crawford tonight kind of went, yeah, okay, I can do that too. Number 22, dropping 3 spots from where they were last week, is Florida. Now, I get it. Florida's had a really tough schedule. Florida's been against really, really tough teams. Florida's also lost 9 out of 16 games. I can't bump a team up in the power rankings when they're losing games. And for me, I haven't seen a consistent 60 minutes. So if they were, in a game where it's really close, it's 1-1 the whole way through, and then they lose it in overtime 2-1, but they have 3-1 leads, and then they blow it, or they're behind 3-1, and then they come back. And there's no telling with Florida from one game to the next what you're going to get. There's an inconsistency there that I find kind of alarming. The good thing is Bobrovsky's picking it up from where he was at the start of the season, and I think he's going to definitely make an improvement. Tomorrow, Sam Montembeau's in net for the Rangers, so we'll see how that goes for him. Number 21, dropping 1 spot from last week, is Winnipeg. And for Winnipeg, they won their most recent game. They lost the one before that. Winnipeg has the potential to make the playoffs. They're not far out of them. And again, I do like what's going on with Winnipeg, but the defense still makes me nervous. And honestly, Hellebuck has been making them look better than they are. The win over San Jose being a good example. Without Hellebuck's performance, they don't get anywhere near a win in that game. And it's not the only one that they've won where Hellebuck kind of sort of steals it. So the potential is still there for Winnipeg to move up, but for right now, they end up dropping down. Now, dropping down a lot more than they did, and I had thought about dropping Anaheim even further. So Anaheim drops from 14 to 20. And I had thought about putting them behind Winnipeg, which would have Winnipeg stay in the same spot. People still wouldn't have been happy with that, of course. But for me with Anaheim, I'm like, well, 6 spots is a lot to drop in a week anyways. So it's kind of letting people know, hey, that fast start that Anaheim was off to that had them up here, yeah, that's dead. That's dead. And there's problems with their scoring. They're relying a lot on young kids, which is... It's nice to see a team believing in its youth, but at the same time, we have criticized the Oilers for years for rushing guys into the NHL. And hey, out you go! Come on, you're supposed to be the big guy. You're our guy now. And so I can't really give Anaheim a pass for somewhat doing the same thing. And we'll see how things go for them from here. But their scoring is definitely an issue. As long as you have Gibson and Miller playing as well as they are, they should remain in the mix for a playoff spot. But I remember saying that at this time last year too. And then things sort of fell apart for them. Now, they don't have Carlisle behind the bench, so it shouldn't be like last year, but last year wasn't supposed to be like that either. Number 19, moving up 5 spots from last week. So this is one of those teams that's passed past Winnipeg. And for Philadelphia, their home record is really good. Their road record needs a little bit of improvement. We'll see how things work out for them tomorrow. They have a game in Boston. That's going to be a really good test for a Philly team that has proven over the last 8 days they can have a saw-off with the Toronto Maple Leafs. They are very equidistant from... that's not the word I'm looking for. Very equivalent to the Maple Leafs when they play against each other. Farabee's been really, really solid for them as well. He's played his 10th game, which was newsworthy, I guess. And they said, usually if a guy plays his 10th game, he'll play the whole season. Not necessarily. Until that 40th game, he hasn't burned a year of restricted free agency. So come game 39, if Farabee's not playing particularly well or they think he has more stuff to work on, he may not stay the whole season with Philly. But again, it's way too early to state it. Number 18, moving up 4 spots, Dallas. Dallas has won 7 out of 8. And not only that, but as this winning has continued, they're getting better. They're getting better with each win, and they're beating pretty good teams as well. So for Dallas, right now, they look like the team they were supposed to be before the season started. Pavelski's fitting in a lot better. Corey Perry's not scoring, but he's providing some sandpaper for the team. He's distracting to the other team. I'm still not a huge fan of his overall. That's not going to change. But he does have a role, and he is playing it relatively well for the Dallas Stars. The fact that they've won 7 out of 8 while they're getting virtually no production from Jamie Benn means that if/when he gets it going, they could really get going. And both Bishop and Hudobin have been solid during this streak for Dallas. Number 17, dropping 8 spots from last week, Carolina. This is concerning. This is the lowest Carolina's been. They started the season at 16. And I'm at some point going to compare where teams are in the power rankings now to where they were at the start of the season for me. Because I think that's interesting to look at and see, okay, which ones was I the furthest off with and which ones was I closest to. And with Carolina, they've kind of ended up where I thought they would, but not the way that I thought they would. Save percentage with goaltenders has dropped, and their shooting percentage has dropped. You can't have both of those things going on at the same time. It really damages your ability to win games. So for Carolina, they're in a tough spot right now, right? Number 16, moving up 2 spots from last week, Montreal. And Montreal were 15 after their win over LA, but it's a win over LA. So with the win over LA being 31st, I look at that and I go, that's nice. They also made it tougher on themselves than it should have been. So with Montreal, they stay at a point where they're playing quite well. They're 3rd in their division right now. And so for Montreal, I do see them as having potential for moving up. It's just a matter of the teams that are ahead of them being ahead of them in my eyes. This is why I watch every single game that I can to try to peg down, okay, this team I think is playing well, even though the record may not show it. This team I think is probably, even despite their record, they've got other stuff to work on. And with Montreal, I do have them in a position to make the playoffs at being 16th. So there's that. Number 15, moving up 1 spot from where they were last week, is Calgary. And I'm not sure with the Flames. I don't think they're out of the woods when it comes to concerns about their top line and their production and whether or not they could have a big letdown after last year. We've talked about, and I've heard it talked about whether or not Tampa's still dealing with the ghosts from the first round last year. And I wonder if Calgary's kind of struggling to get themselves together, maybe thinking back to that first round loss to Colorado that they admitted bothered them all summer. So as the season rolls along, and they're 20 games into it right now, we'll see if they're able to make that move and get themselves back into a position like they were last season. Number 14, moving up 3 spots from where they were last week, are the Maple Leafs. And for Toronto, they are currently, I believe, 2nd in their division. I didn't update this. I just threw the board up. I didn't update this. So this is from last week. But Toronto right now, they've definitely made a move. There is some vulnerability, I think, with Boston that it's there. And I think that was revealed this week when Detroit beat them. if you can shut that first line down, you can beat the Bruins. And that is one thing that has kind of made me a little nervous about the Bruins right from the start of the season. That first line is fantastic. But while they're first in the division, a team like Toronto could definitely sneak up on them. Montreal could as well, as could Tampa. This is not over. And of course, Florida, when their schedule gets easier, if they can beat those teams they're supposed to beat, they'll be in the mix as well. The Atlantic, pretty strong. And Ottawa proving to be stronger than they were expected to be. Number 13, dropping 5 spots from last week, is Vancouver. They didn't win this week, and so I had to drop them down. The loss to St. Louis, you could look at and say, well, they got to overtime, but the loss to Chicago and then the loss to Winnipeg, those ones are concerning. And now they're back home. They get New Jersey, and then they get Nashville. And those 2 games are going to tell us a lot about where Vancouver's at, because if they lose against New Jersey and against Nashville, and depending on, it doesn't matter whether those are overtime, shootout, whatever they are, that would point to a prolonged slump. And Vancouver hasn't had one of those yet this year. This was the first time they've lost back-to-back games in regulation since the first 2 games of the season. They don't want to make it 3 tomorrow. Number 12, moving up 1 spot from last week, is Pittsburgh. Now, they're going to be challenged because Pittsburgh could very well be without Crosby, and we're not sure what exactly happened, just that he didn't finish the game, and he was hurt, and so Pittsburgh could be a team that finds themselves dropping quite substantially next week. That being said, I thought that their victory tonight, while shootout related, and they did spot a 2-goal lead to Chicago, it shows that they do have the ability to come back. They did it against Boston before eventually losing. They did beat the New York Islanders. If they'd lost to the New York Islanders, odds are they would probably be down maybe as low as maybe 15th. I could argue that they've been struggling, but beating the Islanders and the way they did it, that was very impressive. So yeah, they weren't taking a drop this week. Number 11, dropping 5 spots from last week, the Sabres, who went overseas and didn't fix their issues, for lack of a better term. And there are some concerns with scoring. Carter Hutton didn't have a fantastic game today either. And if their goaltending numbers become more normal, and over the last few weeks they've definitely dropped from where they were at the beginning of the season, I do have some concerns about Buffalo's standing. They've already fallen out of a top 3 spot in that division. So I do have them higher up than some teams that they're technically behind in the standings, because I still think they can turn it around. But yeah, next week, if we see further regression, they could end up down here. Number 10, same spot as they were last week, Arizona. They have their good nights, and then tonight against Minnesota, I don't know how you lose a 3-goal lead or 2-goal lead. They lost. They were up 2-0, and then it was 3-1. But they managed it against a Minnesota team that has struggled this year, especially when it comes to scoring goals. So Arizona's got some stuff to work on. Rick Tocchet's the man to get that done. But if Darcy Kemper's numbers start to slump, as they have over the last couple of games, that's going to be an issue as well, because I still look at Arizona's offense, and I still wonder how they're going to be able to continue to be top 15 in the league. Like, I still see them as one of the weaker teams offensively overall. Number 9, moving up 3 spots from last week, Vegas. Their road trip, 1-1-1 this week. I thought 2 of the 3 games they played very well, and that 3rd game was against Washington, and Washington's best team in the league right now. So, yeah, they end up moving up to here. But it's faint praise right now, and there are some teams that are legitimately likely to move up next week. Montreal and Calgary being 2 of them. And of course, Philly, Dallas, Winnipeg. There are a number. So for Vegas, they've got to be wary of the fact that Edmonton is still putting up wins when they need to. Calgary is showing some life, and while Vancouver struggled over the last couple, they've still been pretty good. And Anaheim may very well be able to turn things around. Oh, and San Jose's won 3 in a row. So the Pacific may be a lot tougher than we thought it would be. Number 8, moving up 7 spots from last week, is Tampa. Now, Tampa is the most erratic team in the league when it comes to their play. Both games against Buffalo, that's how they're supposed to play. That was some good hockey. And that was after the week before. Just they're so all over the place. So I genuinely believe that they belong here right now, based on those 2 games in Stockholm, and especially that they seem to keep getting better as those 2 games went along. That being said, where are they next week? They could be back to 15th. I am well aware, too, that Buffalo and Tampa, because they played back-to-back overseas, they're going to have a nice break before they start playing again. But Tampa is one of the most talented teams in the league. You can make an argument they're the most talented, but they're definitely one of the most talented teams in the league. They've got tons of depth. We saw Joseph get points. We saw Cirelli playing well. Hedman's back. Hedman being back is a big reason why they get the bump as well. Victor Hedman, when he's not in their lineup, that's a huge difference for Tampa, because for me, Hedman's still the best defenseman in the NHL. Number 7, same spot as last week, Edmonton. So Edmonton, who are 4-4-2 in their last 10, I still have concerns with their depth scoring, but you know what? Draisaitl's good enough that maybe he can pull them into the playoffs. Maybe he and McDavid are the guys that can pull them into the playoffs. And with the way Mike Smith's been playing in net, he's been absolutely fantastic. Really fantastic. And he's a big part of the reason, too, why they don't fall back. He is the reason they beat Pittsburgh this past week. So the Oilers, somehow, some way, still managing to get ahead. And a lot of it has to do with the defensive numbers, which are much better this year under Dave Tippett, as would have been expected. Number 6, dropping 2 spots from last week, Nashville. Yep, the Preds. Losing 9-4 to Colorado, that's concerning. Now, you lose against San Jose, but it's in a shootout, and they only allowed 1 goal through 65 minutes. So the stingy defense was back, and the goaltending was really, really good tonight, too. So I'm looking at the game against Colorado and going, that's a one-off. That's not a trend. And so I didn't, horrendously punish them for that. That being said, if they allow 9 goals in a game this week, I'm going to have to revisit that. Number 5, staying in the same spot as last week, Colorado. The Avs, even without points from McKinnon, they can win. Without Landeskog, without Rantanen, they're showing we can still win some games. So for Colorado, it's not over. But I don't know how long they can keep this up without their star players. But as long as Makar is headed towards a Calder trophy, and right now it looks like he's the runaway winner for the Calder. I understand I said Norris during the first take of this. I apologize for that. But yeah, Calder, I think, is Makar's. I can't see anybody else getting it. The Norris belongs to John Carlson right now. He owns it. Number 4, dropping 3 spots from where they were last week, Boston Bruins. Rough week. It was a rough week. Losing to Montreal and then losing to Detroit. And the loss to Detroit was surprising to me and alarming. As soon as they lost to Montreal, I bumped them out of first. Because that game was one that I felt was too sloppy. I think the biggest problem I have with Boston right now is that their defense/goaltending that was so fantastic early in the season is starting to look kind of frayed and frazzled. And if their defensive numbers continue to struggle, I don't see Boston being in the top row for very much longer. Number 3, moving up 8 spots from last week. That's a lot. That's a ton. And yet St. Louis is playing like the defending Stanley Cup champions. They lose a lead tonight against Calgary, yes, but they find a way to win it in overtime. They give Vancouver a point the other night in Vancouver, but they found a way to win that one in overtime. 3-on-3, these guys are pretty good. 5-on-5, they're pretty good. The power play is excellent. Their goaltending's really good. It is getting tougher and tougher to find an actual weakness with St. Louis, and yet they don't have Tarasenko. They got better when Tarasenko got hurt. It's hard to even recall. Oh, right, they're without Tarasenko. Yeah, they got better. So that's where with Colorado being without Rantanen and Landeskog, sometimes it can help a team going through that adversity. And then the idea is when the star player comes back, like Malkin with Pittsburgh, that can be that extra spark to make your team not just a playoff team, but a legitimate contender. So we'll see how long St. Louis can keep this up. But with Sammy Blais showing what he's shown so far this year, maybe they can. Number 2. And between 2 and 1, there's very little difference. So we've got the Islanders moving up to 2, and the Capitals moving back to where they were. The Capitals were number 1 the first 2 weeks. Dropped to number 11, went back to 6, went back to 5. They were 2 last week, now they're number 1. And as soon as Boston lost against Montreal, they became number 1. And I don't know that it's necessarily that close. The scary thing with these two teams, the Islanders have won 11 out of 12. That 12th, they should have won that one too over Pittsburgh. They lost 3 out of 4 to start the season. If they'd been a little bit better to start the season, they'd be on a historic pace. Whereas Washington, who are the number 1 team overall, well, they started the season blowing leads. And if they hadn't blown those leads, yeah, it's scary to think of just how good these guys are and how much better they can be. It's much like St. Louis, who have an amazing record, and it still feels like they're just coming into their own. That they're just starting to play the hockey that won them the Stanley Cup in June. So yeah, if I was going to name off contenders, and I know when I do the NFL power rankings, sometimes I say, Super Bowl contenders end here. I'll talk about like the top 5 or 6. For me, Stanley Cup contenders go up to probably here right now. I say that because the Oilers, the depth is still, for me, I want to see more from them. I want to see Chason get on a bit of a run. Tampa Bay, the consistency. Vegas, same. Arizona, the scoring. Buffalo's been in a slump. Pittsburgh, well, without Crosby, if they're missing Crosby, right? So for me, if the playoffs started today, these are the 6 teams that I could see winning a Stanley Cup. Nashville can score. Their goaltending's fantastic. Colorado, you've got to think, would get healthy before the playoffs get here, and they're still number 5 right now. Boston, well, they went to the finals last year, so, and they're still pretty darn good. St. Louis, defending Stanley Cup champions, don't write them off. The Islanders, who were supposed to fall out, I'm pretty sure I picked the Islanders to still make the playoffs. I had Carolina falling out. And the Capitals, who before the season started, I said, that's the team that I think is going to win the Stanley Cup. So I'm still of that mind. I haven't seen anything yet that would change my mind about that. Okay, that being said, it is now 1:30 a.m. my time, which means it's insanely late or kind of early where you guys are. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just tap it upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I promise I'll just use the board from now on. That's that. Thank you guys so much. I will talk to you again soon.